1 Corinthians chapter 15. This is Paul the Apostle writing. Now remember, writing to Christians. So writing to the church at Corinth. So what we're about to read is God's word through Paul to the church at Corinth. So 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And I'm just going to read a few verses from verse 1. So that's 1 Corinthians chapter 15, beginning to read at verse 1. Now, brothers and sisters, I want to remind you of the gospel I preached to you, which you received and on which you have taken your stand. So, this is Paul now addressing the Christians at Corinth. And he had something that was so important, he wanted to make sure the church had got a firm hold of it, and he said it was the gospel that they had received. He wanted to remind God's people of the very foundation on which they stood, the gospel of Jesus Christ. Verse 2, by this gospel you are saved, if you hold firmly to the word I preach to you. Otherwise, you have believed in vain. So this is what Paul's saying. He's saying, people, there's a lot of information out there in the world. And there's a lot of people preaching a lot of very interesting topics. And there's a lot of people talking to you and wanting you to hear their particular word or their particular word of encouragement. But Paul's saying there's only one truth. That's the gospel I first preached to you guys. Paul said, let me remind you of that, so that when you hear everything else the world is telling you, you will know the truth. And let's face it, we live in a world that's filled with ideas. In fact, I don't think ever before has the world and the church that's in the world been faced with so many options. Now, you could leave here today and you could walk into a local supermarket and you could pick up a magazine of self-help ideas. And you could go to a library and you could find a book on how to find spiritual enlightenment. You could turn your radio to numerous radio stations and hear words of lifting up and encouragement. But Paul's saying there's only one truth. There's only one gospel. And that remains the same today. The gospel hasn't changed. God's word hasn't changed. It was even before